Want to buy some bonds? Biden's radioactive 14th Amendment bonds are the real debt ceiling Armageddon. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today, we're going to be talking about President Joe Biden. He's threatening to invoke the 14th Amendment to issue more Treasury bonds above the congressionally prescribed $31.4 trillion national debt ceiling. This is set up as an act of Congress. They've been doing this for about a century, where the government is not allowed to borrow any more money than what Congress legally sets forth under the law. And this is actually, I think, done under the 14th Amendment, which states that the public, the debt, the validity thereof shall not be questioned, but it's authorized by law under the 14th Amendment. But you have to hear from Joe Biden himself, where he's basically taking this new authority onto himself, where he thinks he can actually issue Treasury debt without any vote in Congress. Take a listen to this.
Number 4, I'm looking at the 14th Amendment as whether or not we have the authority. I think we have the authority. The question is, could it be done and invoked in time that it would not be appealed and as a consequence past the date in question and still default on the debt? That's a question that I think is unresolved. And so the point is, I'm hoping and I believe that when we sat in the room with all the leaders from Mitch McConnell on, and they said, we will not default, period. We will not default. That's what all, including Kevin McCarthy, said, we will not default. And so I'm assuming that we mean what we say, and we'll figure out a way not have to default.
So that's President Joe Biden right there. And again, I think he is absolutely wrong about this. I do not believe that any president of the United States can borrow above the whatever Congress sets forth at the debt as the debt ceiling. Currently, it's $31.4 trillion. And we're going to just jump into my piece here. I think this is very, very telling about where we are right now. And I just, it's very important that the Congress gets this right, but also that the country gets this right, because otherwise we're going to be issuing radioactive bonds onto the markets. And I think that's going to be a real financial Armageddon. Biden says, I'm looking at the 14th Amendment. I think we have the authority to raise the debt ceiling without Congress. Unbelievable. Here he says it. This was in Hiroshima, Japan, for the G7 meeting on May 21. At a press conference. You can also look up his remarks on whitehouse.gov. I recommend, if you want to keep up with what President Biden is doing to violate the Constitution, the best source for that is whitehouse.gov, and you'll get a pretty much a very accurate account of all of his unconstitutional comings and goings here. And he's outlining his view that the president of the United States has the power to add as much new debt above the legally prescribed $31.4 trillion debt ceiling established under law as he deems fit under Section 4 of the 14th Amendment. And we have that right here. I wanted to read it to you so that you can understand what is in the 14th Amendment, Section 4, because I think it's very important to this debate. It states, quote, the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned. But neither the United States nor shall any state assume or pay any debt or obligation incurred in aid of insurrection or rebellion against the United States, or any claim for the loss or emancipation of any slave. But all such debts, obligations, and claims shall be held illegal and void. So this does two things. It establishes that the Union debt that was incurred during the Civil War must be paid. And it states that the debt of the Confederacy, that will never be paid. And nor shall any state assume it, nor can Congress assume that debt. And so it establishes that there is valid debt. The only valid debt is that which is authorized by law. And then under Section 5, it states that the Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. So very clear when you combine that the only valid debt is that which is authorized by law under Section 4 of the 14th Amendment, and that Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. It is perfectly clear that Joe Biden has no authority to increase the debt ceiling under his own authority under the 14th Amendment. That's just wrong. Here's the most recent debt ceiling increase, joint resolution relating to increasing the debt limit. This was on December 16, 2021. Quote, resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled. Note 31 USC 3101. Note that the limitation under Section 3101, subsection B of Title 31 United States Code, as most recently increased by Public Law 11750, 31 USC 3101 note, is increased by $2.5 trillion. Approved December 16, 2021. This passed the House, this passed the Senate. It was signed into law by President Joe Biden. He knows that he's not able to increase the debt ceiling under his own authority. That's absolutely patently absurd. Again, ratified in 1868. At the time, the 14th Amendment, this section was to guarantee the bonds that had been issued by the federal government to pay for the Civil War. Quote, including debts incurred for payments of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, and to simultaneously repudiate the debts of the Confederacy. The second part of the section wiped away the Confederacy's debt. Quote, neither the United States nor any state shall assume or pay any debt or obligation incurred by the Confederacy during the Civil War, because they're going to be held illegal and void. And I say these provisions must be read consistently. So the debts incurred by the federal government, authorized under law by Congress, quote, shall not be questioned. And the debts incurred by the Confederacy, quote, shall be illegal and void, end quote. Neither the United States nor any state shall assume or pay any debt or obligation incurred by the Confederacy. Therefore, the debt obligations incurred by the federal government, authorized under law, must be paid, and those incurred by the Confederacy must never be paid. Now, let's see what happened to the Civil War debt of the Confederacy. This is from November 9, 1865. The rebel debts. This was a New York Times article, again from 1865. It starts, quote, the debts of the Confederate government contracted for the purposes of war and for all other purposes were swept away when the Confederacy fell. All its currency, bills, bonds, treasury notes, and promises to pay of every kind became worthless to the holders, even though these holders had given them real property or services of a positive value. After the fall of Richmond, $100 bills based on the faith and credit of the Confederacy were sold for a nickel cent apiece, and $1,000 notes were exchanged evenly for 3-cent shin plasters. There's little, if any, talk in any part of the South about assuming any part of the debt. Its magnitude is appalling, and the states of the South did not become responsible for it in their individual capacity. On its face, it was declared to be payable upon the establishment of the independence of the Southern Confederacy, thus linking its fortunes with that of the rebel government. But it was but logical that the Confederacy's credit should cease to have a value when the Confederacy itself ceased to have an existence. But there has appeared in many states, and it still appears in some, a strong party desirous of assuming the payment of the debts contracted by the various states individually in aid of rebellion while members of the Confederacy. And this goes on and on. But the whole purpose of the 14th Amendment was to prevent this from happening, to, just to knock the Confederate debts out, but also to get rid of the currency. People were still using the currency thereafter. But because Congress didn't authorize or assume that debt, it became worthless. It became a $100 note became worth a nickel. $1,000 note was worth a 3-cent shin plaster. And so that's what Joe Biden is going to do to, to our treasury debt. He thinks he has the authority, but he's going to be issuing radioactive bonds under his authority. It's not under his authority. These are going to be toxic bonds for the bond market. If you hit the debt ceiling, he says, yeah, we're going to increase the debt ceiling to 32 trillion or 40 trillion or 50 trillion or 100 trillion. Doesn't matter what he says. And then he starts issuing bonds from the treasury. These are going to be radioactive bonds, and that's going to be a real financial Armageddon. Interest rates are going to skyrocket. It's going to be like the rebel debts. It's going to be worth a nickel for $100 note or something like that. So I think the prices are going to plummet. This will cause a financial crisis, worse than it would be if you just hit the debt ceiling and you just didn't have any more money to pay for other obligations besides the creditors. You'd almost be better off doing that. So right off the bat, one glaring issue for President Biden is the $31.4 trillion debt ceiling is currently established under law that Congress passed and the president signed into law. The debt ceiling cannot go higher without Congress. Here, Biden is attempting to remove Congress's clearly delineated role and power to, quote, enforce by appropriate legislation the provision of Section 4 that reads, quote, the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law shall not be questioned. Meaning Congress could pass a law allowing the president or the treasury to increase the debt limit, or it could pass a law saying there is no debt limit. But instead, what it has done for the past century is they say, we're going to set the debt ceiling. We're going to set the public debt limit. And then again, most recently is SJ Res 33 in December of 2021. It was set to $31.4 trillion. The treasury cannot go above that, not without Congress. Again, that took it from 28.9 trillion to 31.4 trillion, not 31.5 trillion, not 31.6 trillion, not 50 trillion, and not 100 trillion. Here, Biden is suggesting that he can just keep increasing the debt ceiling for all time, absent any authority from Congress to do so. That is wrong. It is unconstitutional. And I don't think federal courts and the Supreme Court will let it fly. And that's why this is dangerous and also unprecedented and would be a genuine constitutional, but also a financial crisis, as a rogue treasury started issuing radioactive treasuries that were never authorized by Congress and would probably be struck down by federal courts, given the clear wording of both the 14th Amendment and SJ Res 33 from 2021. Now, Biden, he alluded to this possibility that it would go to court in his appeal in Hiroshima. That's a good place to talk about radioactive bonds, I guess. Quote, the question is, could it be done and invoked in time that it would not be appealed, and as a consequence, past the date in question and still default on the debt? That's a question that I think is unresolved. Yeah, you think there might be a court appeal, Mr. President? Yeah, there's going to be a court appeal, and you think there's not enough time to do it? So here I think he's actually making an excuse for why he might not actually invoke the 14th Amendment to increase the debt ceiling. Because, he's trying to placate his base, basically saying, oh, yeah, you want to use the 14th Amendment. I think we have the authority to do that, but not so fast. I don't think we have time, and it might be appealed in the courts. Yeah, it's going to be struck down in the courts is what's going to happen there. That part, again, could be Biden making an excuse for why he would not be invoking the 14th Amendment, saying there's no time, there might be an appeal. But he cannot act arbitrarily like this. And to say that he can, to just invoke this authority, to say I think we've got it. We've got this authority. Again, Section 5 of the 14th Amendment is perfectly clear. It states the Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. Not the president, not the Supreme Court, but Congress has the power to enforce the provision of Section 4 that states the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law shall not be questioned. So if anything, an honest reading of the 14th Amendment means the federal government must pay the debt authorized by law above all other obligations. So creditors get paid first out of existing revenue. No ifs, ands, or buts. There shouldn't be a default, not under the 14th Amendment. The validity of the public debt authorized by law shall not be questioned. Biden has to pay those bondholders, and he has to pay them first under the provisions. That is if we're reading the 14th Amendment for what it means and how it treated Confederate debt and how it treated the Union debt. Those obligations incurred by the federal government must be paid under the amendment. You have to pay the debt, Mr. President. The 14th Amendment does not mean what you hope it means, Mr. President. You can't do whatever you want. You must act under law, under the Constitution. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day. But first, we're going to go to the chat here. I want to see what you guys are thinking about this. I think that this is absolutely outrageous what Joe Biden thinks he can do, just to raise the debt ceiling all by himself. It's just patently absurd. Yeah, the chat's on fire here. I thought you guys would be upset with this. Let's see here. All right, let's see. All right, Nathaniel May. This MF gonna hide behind some the Constitution, but hide from the rest of it. Biden is a B. Let's see here. Becky Roberts Reese. He can't. No, I agree with that. I don't think he can do this. Patricia Hawthorne Duffin, not legal under the law. Terms of impeachment, have military arrest insane idiot. Well, I don't know about the military getting involved. We don't support, military, rule. We have a constitutional order of things. If you think the president is violating the Constitution or the law, Congress could act. They could impeach President Biden for this. If they say that's a high crime, that would be the proper course there. Let's see. John Coleman. He does not. It only gives him the direction to recognize the debt. What a loser. Thank you for your comment. Let's see here. Nathaniel May. I'll agree. This is valid after he hangs the ones that are guilty. I don't think anyone's getting hung. Let's see here. Barbara Miller Nelson. You being in that position is also unresolved. Okay, let's see. Becky Roberts Reese. House has the purse. That's absolutely correct. And all bills raising revenue that have to originate in the House. But a lot of these debt ceiling increases I've noticed actually come under Senate resolutions. I guess they don't consider the debt to be actual revenue, even though it kind of seems like revenue to me. It seems like these debt ceilings really ought to originate in the House of Representatives because they are increasing the amount of money that can be borrowed. And, borrowing money is that revenue. I guess under the constitutional law they're saying, no, revenue or taxes and borrowing money, that's debt. Those are not the same thing. So let's see here. Lynn Dills. The whole Biden administration needs to go to Gitmo. Or you could just vote against them in 2024 if you feel strongly about it. Let's see here. Janine Spowin. God's taking this lame duck out. Okay. Let's see here. Michael Lewaszewski. How you doing, Michael? Every mandate, policy, and restriction that has always been against our country and business by Biden his entire career. Look it up just so he can invest in China. Yeah, the House Oversight Committee, James Comer, he's on fire right now. I highly recommend. If you look on Daily Torch, we just did a piece recently about a press conference they're doing. They're carrying on an investigation into Biden's foreign business dealings, in Ukraine, in China. But they've collected, $10 million, according to bank records, from foreign business partners. And the House Oversight Committee, they can't find, anything on the ledgers that say, what was this money for? Was this influencing, peddling? Was this pay for play? Was this bribery? These are the questions I think that are going to be asked at this when the House Oversight Committee, James Comer, chairman, gets these hearings underway. Let's see, Tim A. He's an empty suit controlled by Barack Obama. I think he's perfectly capable of issuing the radioactive bonds all by himself, but it's still unconstitutional. Let's see here. Tim Hines. Don't just let that imbecile destroy our economy out of spite. I don't think he's trying to destroy the economy out of spite. In fact, I think he's bluffing. I think he's trying to get Republicans to deal on his terms, to say, I'll just increase the debt ceiling, whether you like it or not. And so you have to do what I say, and we're going to pass this bill the way I think it needs to be passed. But but I think it's kind of an empty threat. The House Republicans with limit, save, and grow, they've already increased the debt ceiling. That's what the bill does, but it also cuts about $4.8 trillion out of the deficit over the next 10 years. That will markedly, that's actually going to reduce interest payments owed on the debt over the next 10 years by about 50 billion a year, 500 billion over the total time of the decade, 10 years. So you really get 4.3 trillion of cuts, results in $550 billion saved from interest payments alone. Let's see here. Iris Crawford, you can't spend more than you bring in and get out of debt. Joe is delusional. I think Congress has been kind of delusional about this. The idea that you can just keep dramatically expanding the debt, printing money into existence. Eventually, it was going to come back and bite us, and that's surely what has happened in COVID and after COVID. For COVID, we printed in 2020 and 2021 and early 2022 more than $6 trillion. We printed it, we borrowed it, and we spent it into existence to take care of COVID, to do helicopter money, to issue checks to people, and so forth. Now, in 2020, you can say, well, the economy was shut down, and so they had to do something to not have a massive depression. And so you can almost just, because you don't know how bad the virus is, you don't know how long this is going to go on. The states were already shutting everything down, and the cities and the counties, shutting the schools down, shutting businesses down, and so on and so forth. So Congress spends a bunch of money to kind of offset the collapse of the economy. There was a lot of small business loans that were going out, the Paycheck Protection Program under the Trump administration, so that there would be businesses to return to after the economy reopened, which by the end of 2020, it kind of mostly already had. 25 million jobs were lost in April of 2020, and more than 16 million of those were recovered to the economy by the time former President Trump was leaving office, before Joe Biden ever got sworn into office. And so I think that, but the money, what did it do? You were printing too much money and you were locking down the economy. You had production halts, chasing too few goods. You got to 9.1% inflation by June of 2022. And as a result, interest rates rose. And now the OMB, the White House Office of Management and Budget, is projecting that the debt's going to grow to $50.7 trillion by 2033. I think it could be more like 69 or 70 trillion dollars if you just go by a kind of an 8% annual growth rate of the national debt. In truth, it's been growing by more than 8% every single year since 1980. And that includes, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush again, and Obama, and then Trump, and then now Biden. They say on average, it's been growing by more than 8% a year. And at that rate, from its current level, you could see the national debt topping 100 trillion by as soon as 2037 or 2040 or somewhere thereabouts. So watch for the debt to get dramatically larger over the next 10, 15, 20 years, larger than you could have ever possibly imagined. But it's just growing at the same exact rate that it's been since the 1980s, and it's been out of control. Congress is spending like drunken sailors. And the other problem is baby boomers and Gen X and now millennials. We haven't had enough children. Because we don't have enough children, you get comparatively fewer workers entering the labor force. That means comparatively fewer taxpayers to deal with the ballooning obligations of Social Security, Medicare, but also Medicaid and other government programs that are going to dramatically expand, especially programs that support seniors as the baby boomers continue the retirement wave. And so those are the reasons we have these fiscal deficits right now. I honestly, I believe if we just had more children, that probably wouldn't even be too much of a problem. But the point is you couldn't raise taxes enough to deal with it. So you better incentivize fertility going forward. But in the meantime, you need to do what Kevin McCarthy and House Republicans are proposing. They need to do limit, save, grow. They need to save $5 trillion on deficits over the next 10 years. So we can get our bearings and try to reduce inflation and get the debt under control going forward. Let's see here. Eddie Bellius. This Babylon idiot needs to be in an insane asylum. All right, let's see here. Carol A. Gates Miller, U.S. GDP 1% with him in D.C. That's correct. The gross domestic product reported by the Bureau of Economic Analysis has been slowing down the past 3 quarters in a row. When inflation was running hot, it was at 3%. And then as it kind of cooled down, as the economy slowed down, then it was at 2% in the fourth quarter. It was at 1% in the first quarter of 2023. And so I think that we're in, the economy is definitely slowing down right now. The Federal Reserve is projecting that unemployment is going to be much higher by the end of this year and in next year. We could see that recession that almost every indicator I've looked at is kind of seeing on the horizon, this uptick in unemployment. Unemployment usually does go up when inflation slows down. So as the inflation numbers continue to cool off, watch for more people, more businesses to lay people off and for unemployment to go up. That's the consequence of overheating the economy by printing too much money, chasing too few goods. Becky Roberts Reese and his payoffs and his pockets. Let's see here. Barbara Waddick Churchill, FJB. What does that mean? All right, let's see here. This has nothing to do with the legitimacy of debt. Dennis Mace says Biden doesn't have the authority to override Congress. I agree with that. He cannot do this under his own authority because he has no authority to increase the debt ceiling. Carol A. Gates Miller. He's or whoever is speaking to him is also trying to push forward a new disinformation cabinet and czar. Yeah, the CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and also the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force are absolutely out of control. They were working with social media. On Facebook, they even had a disinformation portal so that the FBI could submit posts that they thought were problematic and were disinformation. Just basically American people expressing their opinions, and they felt like they needed to regulate that. Same thing was happening at Twitter. Check out the Twitter files on Twitter. Absolutely just unbelievable, but, kind of predictable when you create government agencies in the dead of night during lame duck sessions of Congress, as happened in 2018. During the House Republicans, they were going out of power. And so one of Speaker Paul Ryan's last acts was to push this CISA agency on the American people. And it turns out they were going to engage in a disinformation policing mission. You've got Mayorkas, the DHS secretary. He's saying, we're not the truth police. And it's like, yeah, who you kidding, buddy? Yeah, you're the truth police. All right. You got CISA under DHS. You're working with Twitter. You're working with Facebook. And you're removing content that's, frankly, a lot of it's from conservatives and Republicans, and they're expressing opposition to many of these policies that are going on right now. Let's see here. Michael Luzewski, how can Biden lift policies that were protecting our national security? He had no right by any law to do that. I agree with that. And right, FJB, what's that mean? Let's see, Joseph Torres. Why doesn't that piece of get Biden and get impeached already? Maybe House oversight. That's what they're working towards. They're looking at this issue with the foreign influence and millions of dollars flowing to the Biden crime family. Let's see here. Wander Laird, I agree 100%. He has no right at all, but he will get away with it because he thinks he is above the law. Yeah, to invoke this power, even to threaten to do it, he thinks he's above the law. And I think that's outrageous. Presidents are supposed to uphold the Constitution. They're supposed to uphold federal laws. And President Biden saying he doesn't have to follow the law. That is outrageous, and you should be outraged about that. I think we all should be. Deborah Griggs Donnelly, FJB, POS. Let's see here. Don Eccles. Biden and his carnival misfits are idiots with no real economic or real world knowledge. Remember, the evil sends him little Biden cartel thingies to steal, kill, and destroy. The only people they are interested in saving is themselves and their foreign, especially Chinese owners. Thank you, Don. Let's see here. Dennis Mace, no, he will not get away with it. I don't think he's going to get away with it. And, and if I had to guess, they're going to probably come to some sort of resolution and that there's going to be a bill that passed. In 2011, the same thing happened. In 1996, the same thing happened. You had a Republican House or a Republican House and Senate. In the case of 1996, in 2011, it was just a Republican House. They didn't want to increase the debt ceiling, not without spending cuts. And so you got sequestration under John Boehner. You got now in the 1996 example, they actually got the Congressional Review Act. They said, we want to bring down regulations and other types of spending. So this is not unprecedented. This is basically what happens when you have mixed government. You're going to have, debates over what should we do with the debt ceiling? What should we do with the appropriations bills and the omnibus bill and the continuing resolution? You have FISA reauthorization coming up at the end of the year. Some of these are considered must-pass pieces of legislation, and so that gives leverage to House Speaker Kevin McCarthy to say, hey, if you want to get the debt ceiling increased, you better do some spending cuts, which, by the way, would probably help Biden get reelected. I don't know what the heck he's so against this for. Bill Clinton did a debt ceiling deal with Republicans. He got easily reelected. Barack Obama, he did a debt ceiling deal with John Boehner and the Tea Party and House Republicans, and he got easily reelected. When you cut spending and you're a Democrat president, it actually helps to get reelected. So he's really coming kicking and screaming to something that might actually help him politically. Let's see here. KJ Pollock. Corrupt, crazy, belongs in prison. Let's see. Michael Lazewski. Trump was right all along on everything. Inez Gibson, you said that correct. Let's see. Peter Buttram. Impeach the president. He needs to go now. Yeah, well, I mean, we'll see what the House is doing or planning in that regard. There's a lot of investigations currently underway that might impact just that very thing. I mean, they impeached Trump a couple times, so maybe Republicans figure what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Bob Wilson, figured it out yet? Still thankful for everything Obama is doing. Can't wait to vote blue again. Let's see here. Michael Lazewski, someone has to wake up Biden and tell him hell is fueled by oil and he needs to get drilling to try to put out his future home. Okay. Inez Gibson, don't forget his handlers. They're paving his path. Michael Lazewski, save America. Phil Espo, horrible. Hey, thanks for joining us from YouTube. Carol A. Gates Miller. Remember, Biden was supposed to be a constitutional law scholar. This evil manipulation of our Constitution turning upside down, just like our country, under his installment. Satan, Antichrist. Oh, my goodness. All right, let's see here. Trusty Fly. I would assume this is impeachable if the House says it is. Donna Stevens. People need to quit making excuses for him. He is evil. I think he's bluffing. I don't think he's actually going to try to increase the debt ceiling under the 14th Amendment because the Supreme Court's probably going to knock it down. It'll cause a financial crisis. You'll have these radioactive bonds floating out there. Hey, you want to buy some bonds that are probably not legal and are most certainly illegal? I mean, just think at the novelty of getting one of the illegal bonds, maybe at an auction, like you could sell it at an art auction or something. Say, I've got one of the illegal Biden bonds. And then, maybe in like 10 years or something, it'll be worth something. But right now they won't be worth anything. They're going to, and they would definitely throw the bond market into disarray. And that's why he's probably not going to do it. Kim Bully. Obama tried the same thing. I just watched his speech from his time in office. He was advised it cannot be done, period. And that's true. Yet this is not the first time people have said, oh, just use the 14th Amendment, even though the 14th Amendment says that the validity of the public debt authorized by law, which means only Congress can pass a law. It has to be signed into law by the president, but only Congress can pass a law. And so the validity of the public debt and Section 5 of the 14th Amendment gives Congress the ability and the power to enforce the provisions of the 14th Amendment, including the validity of the public debt. So Congress gets to say what makes the debt valid. What is the public debt? How is it valid? When is it valid? Under what circumstances? And what is the limit to our borrowing? That's what the debt ceiling is. Again, they could say no debt ceiling. Congress could say that too. They could say the president can raise the debt ceiling, but that would require an act of Congress to be signed into law. And so that's the difference there. Richard A. Pullman, impeach the bum. Let's see. Josie Wales, Cantaloupe. I have a feeling this isn't going to turn out well. Yeah, it's like that line in Star Wars. I got a bad feeling about this. Let's see. Michael Lazewski. Who needs China and Russia making threats to us when Biden is actually destroying our country? Marvin Taylor, Biden shouldn't have pushed off his obligations, but flung off negotiations for over 100 days. He burnt the time up. Congress has passed the debt ceiling. Senate has not and refuses to vote on it. So if default happens, it all falls on Democrats. I agree with that. Recessions, when they do happen, typically people are going to blame the incumbent president. They're going to blame the incumbent party. Just ask Herbert Hoover. Just ask Jimmy Carter, just ask George Herbert Walker Bush, and just ask Donald Trump. Every single one of them have recessions on their watch, and every single one of them lost their reelection bids. What a coincidence. Carol A. Gates Miller, he's still trying to, through his front man, Biden, also his fall guy, scapegoat. Stephanie D'Olimpio, MAGA. Let's see here. Carol Ann O'Neill, Biden should be in jail with his son. Michael Lozewski, he's always been praising China and shouting hatred to the American people his entire career. Kim bullied the entire administration. Crystal Powell, someone better take this worthless excuse of a president I have ever seen out of office now. He thinks he can do anything he wants. He has wasted $12 trillion in less than 3 years and no accountability. Get him out. Congress might be looking at impeachment. You never know. They did it to Trump twice, so maybe Republicans will do the same thing to the Democratic president, Joe Biden. Michael Lozewski, remember what I said about those 2 false impeachments, and now with the Durham report, actually say treason trying to overthrow a president. Yeah, the Durham report was absolutely devastating to the Justice Department and the FBI, the State Department, and the intelligence agencies. They were using, probably what they knew to be false information to accuse President Trump, at the time, then candidate Trump, of being a Russian agent. And it was paid for opposition research from the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee. It was concocted. There were doubts expressed about it at the time and throughout the entire course of the investigation, but there was no course correction, even when they were turning up evidence that it wasn't true. And so how are we going to reform the Justice Department and the FBI and the intelligence agencies? Well, I'll tell you one way you could start to do that. You're going to have this church committee with Jim Jordan in the House Judiciary Committee, this special select committee on weaponization. They're going to uncover as much of this as possible. But there's former President Trump's declassified documents. The day before he left office, he was declassifying the last trove of documents from the botched Russiagate investigation. Who knows if everything in the Durham report is everything that was in those documents? Maybe that was everything. The information that was disclosed had to be declassified in some capacity. But I believe that those documents, Ron Johnson and Chuck Grassley, they've been trying to go to Merrick Garland saying, we need the Trump declassified documents that he's, there's actually documentation that he declassified these right before he left office. We need to see those because those don't belong to the Justice Department. They belong to the American people. And Ron Johnson and Chuck Grassley are absolutely correct. They cannot hold on to those Trump declassified documents. I don't care what the special counsel says. Let's see here. Kimberly, I think Barr and Durham are all part of the deep state, sadly. I think John Durham did a really good job with his report. The FISA, law recommendations that he made were kind of weak. But that wasn't why he gave us all the facts we need to understand how the Russiagate investigation developed. And therefore, members of Congress, they know what to do. They know how to fix this. And now they know what most of the facts are. We just need those last trove of declassified documents that Trump put out there. And I think we could really get to the bottom of this, or in the very least, we'll have all the facts at our disposal to make proper recommendations to Congress. Chuck Miller, there are a lot of people that belong in jail. Most are from the same party politically. Who believes that anything will be done? I don't believe anything will be done. Lester Mount, Biden has said the Constitution is not absolute, so he can ignore the parts he doesn't like. It seems to be a problem with presidents when they want to exceed their authority. I don't think that's a partisan problem, by the way. Michael Lozewski, everyone has to unite outside government and stop attacking one another, which is what this administration's strategy was to taxpayers to distract us from their desperation for destroying America. It's their fault. We pay all our taxes and expect our government not to mislead what they are doing with their taxes. Let's see here. Kim Booley, AI and cheap immigrant labor. Dave Wallace from YouTube. Hello from YouTube again. It's called tyranny. Yes. Yes, it is. Carol A. Gates Miller. Yes, he said that. He also said, as VP with Mayorkas standing next to him in 2012, we have a mass flow of migrants. Obama was called deporter in chief, deported the most veterans than any U.S. president. See here, Rebecca Boykin. Let the stock market crash. Charmin Wilkie. FJB. What's that mean? Let's see here. Debbie Heron, Kimberly, not Durham, but absolutely Barr. Who really knows at this point? The greed is real. Well, William Barr appointed John Durham, and he got the report done. So, I mean, there was a lot of speculation. Oh, we're never going to see the Durham report. But fact is that Barr did appoint him, and I think that was a good thing. We supported that at the time. We've supported the Durham investigation, and we support the findings. I don't agree with the recommendations, and we have some recommendations of our own. In fact, we just did a video about that recently. If you go back a few videos, you can see what we said about FISA. Michael Ozuski, I noticed since January 6th, no one has attempted to go protest with all the destruction the U.S. government is doing. I guess everyone is scared. Yeah, you think they're scared? I mean, yeah, obviously don't riot and, break into the Capitol. I mean, look, you can see what happens. I mean, obviously Trump on January 6th, he said to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. And unfortunately, not everyone listened. Let's see here. Rebecca Boykin, get rid of government. It didn't work. Well, what are we going to replace it with? We're Americans for limited government. We're not Americans for no government. So I just need to clarify, we're trying to uphold and protect the Constitution. We want to keep what we have in terms of a constitutional order, because the state of nature, that's what the framers were trying to, overcome. Is overcome the state of nature. You don't want to go back to the state of nature. I think that would be reckless. Let's see. Mary Ann Mays, impeach him. That is under the Constitution. You can do impeachments under the Constitution, but you don't have them in the state of nature. Karen Plessy, I can't seem to get off this darn site. Facebook can be a little addictive, so maybe get outside, get some fresh air occasionally. Michael Lazuski, follow Route 50 West, ends right in front of the White House. Protest and go, or just go sightseeing. Go during the day. So yeah, Michael wants to protest. Let's see here. I don't blame you, Michael. Everyone should be protesting what's going on in this country, but they have to do so peacefully. Michael Lazuski, that was the worst injustice ever done to an American president ever. Also, that's exactly the reason why they invited us home. And then finally, we have Carol A. Gates Miller, great senators, Ron Johnson and Chuck Grassley. I think they are doing a great job. And, I appreciate what they're doing to try to get the last of the declassified documents that Trump had to do with Russiagate. I think that what happened was the White House counsel didn't, according to Kash Patel, complete the paperwork to get these redacted versions of the documents to the White House in time. And so what I think happened was Trump just said, just declassify them in full then. Put those boxes on the plane or something like that. We're taking them to Mar-a-Lago. Put them in, make them a part of the library or something. They belong to the American people. If Trump declassified them under his authority, which is an Article 2 implicit power under the Constitution, then that's it. I mean, it could be embarrassing to the Justice Department. It could be embarrassing to the FBI and the intelligence agencies and the State Department and former President Obama and then Vice President Biden. It could be embarrassing to them all. But it doesn't matter, because the American people have a right to information that the president declassifies. And there's no backseas when it comes to that, especially once the documents are out in the open. So I just think that, Grassley and Johnson, they need to keep pressuring Merrick Garland to turn those documents over, even if it's in the redacted form that Trump had signed. But we're going to get to court cases probably about what Trump actually did as he was leaving office to do with those documents. And I think the American people, if he did declassify them, they have a right to that information, even if it exposes a massive spying scandal by Obama and Biden against the opposition party, the Republicans and the Trump campaign in an election year. 2016 should have never happened. Got a couple more comments here. Casey Caton. Sorry to say, but nothing will happen to these people. I think you're right, Casey. Michael Lazuski, that's exactly what that raid was about, to get everything that would not show themselves for the crookedness and the two false impeachment. I agree with that too. I mean, this is just an unbelievable situation. But again, Joe Biden has absolutely no authority to increase the debt ceiling under his own authority. The 14th Amendment's own text, and particularly Section 5, that says Congress shall have the power to enforce the provisions of the 14th Amendment, including Section 4, which states the validity of the public debt authorized by law shall not be questioned. Biden can't question it. Congress can increase it. But if it doesn't increase it, then President Joe Biden and the Treasury, they have to make payments to our creditors. That's what they're supposed to do under the Constitution and under the federal law. Otherwise, if he's going to issue radioactive bonds, they won't be worth the paper they're printed on. They'll be like Confederate war debt that was worth a nickel for every $100 that had been borrowed. With that, that's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day. Thanks for joining.